Life became noticeably quieter after Dorothy's death. 5 years had passed, and I still woke up in the morning, expecting for a moment to hear the sound of the kettle, which she always put on first thing. Instead, there was silence. Only the ticking of the living room wall clock that I wound every Sunday, as I had done for the last 43 years. My name is Fergus Crandall. I'm 77 years old, and I lived alone in a two-story house on Oak Street in Rosemount, a town I remembered as still a quiet suburb. I'd worked for Midwest Energy for 35 years, rising to chief consulting engineer. Not bragging, just stating a fact, although my daughter Abigail and her husband Harrison Noble would probably say it was just another one of my stories. Thursday was the day I usually had breakfast at the Maple Cafe downtown, a tradition I've maintained for 7 years now. Back when Dorothy started, she used to go to her book club on Thursdays, and I invented this little treat for myself. I slowly tied the laces on my old-fashioned brown shoes. Dorothy always said I should wear more modern shoes, but I was stubborn. Why change something that had served faithfully for so many years? This character trait, my stubbornness, became one of the stumbling blocks in my relationship with my daughter and son-in-law. "Dad, you're stuck in the last century," Abigail liked to say, rolling her eyes when I refused to use all those newfangled apps they tried to force on me. I threw on my tweed jacket, it was chilly for May, and walked out of the house. Immediately I noticed that Mrs. Fletcher from across the street was spying from behind the curtain again. He raised his hand in greeting, and the curtain immediately fell. Widow Fletcher had been trying to lure me to her tea parties for the 3rd year, but I had politely declined the invitations. I wasn't ready for a new relationship, and frankly, I didn't want one. Dorothy and I had been together for 52 years. That was enough. On my way to the cafe, I stopped by the post office to send a letter to Ralph Baxter, my financial advisor. Yes, I knew I could send an email, but some things I preferred to do the old-fashioned way, especially when it came to my investments. "Good morning, Mr. Crandall," smiled Peggy, the postal worker. "Another letter to Mr. Baxter?" "Yes, Peggy. First class as usual." "Of course. How's your daughter doing?" she asked as she stamped the letter. "Busy with her business as usual," I answered neutrally. The truth was, I hadn't seen Abigail in 2 weeks. She dropped by for 15 minutes to drop off some organic herbal teas from their new product line, assuring me that they would cleanse my kidneys and improve circulation. The conversation was perfunctory, about the weather, how their sales were growing, and the fact that I should have my creaking wicket fixed because it's ruining the impression of the whole house, Dad. At the Maple Cafe, I was greeted by Donna, the owner of the establishment, with a special smile. "Your table is ready, Mr. Crandall." She led me to a corner seat by the window, my favorite. Abigail had been here with me once and noticed that special treatment. "They know you here, don't they?" she asked with mild surprise. "Of course, I'm a regular," I replied. "It's strange that they're making such a fuss over you. They usually do that to customers who leave good tips," she grinned, obviously assuming that my pension didn't allow for much in the way of tips. I didn't say anything. I didn't explain that I'd helped Donna get a favorable loan to expand her business through one of my old contacts at First National Bank. Why? Abigail wouldn't have believed it or brushed it off anyway. Jessie, the waitress, brought my usual order without further question: oatmeal with maple syrup, avocado toast, and coffee. "Mr. Crandall, can I see you?" I looked up and saw Silas Byrne, owner of the local print shop. "Sure, Silas, have a seat." He looked around nervously and lowered his voice. "I got your message from Leonard about the expansion. The paperwork will be ready by Monday. We can proceed as soon as you say so." I nodded and sipped my coffee. "Good. Keep me posted." Silas left, and I noticed the woman at the next table peering curiously in my direction. Everyone knew everyone in Rosemount, especially old-timers like me, but few knew about my real dealings and connections. I preferred to keep it in the shadows. Barely had I finished breakfast when the phone rang. A number with a Chicago area code. "Fergus Crandall here," I answered, walking toward the exit of the cafe. "Mr. Crandall, this is James Howard from Lakeshore Investments. We have an update on that project we discussed last month." "I can't talk right now, James. I'll call you back in an hour from my home phone." I've always been cautious when it comes to my investments. A habit from when I first started investing in startups with my young protégés in the energy industry. Then it was important not to attract the attention of competitors. Now it was important not to give too much reason to talk in a small town. After the cafe, I headed for the park. Leonard Prosser, my old friend and former corporate lawyer, was already waiting for me by the lake. He was now officially retired like me, but continued to advise a select few clients. I am one of them. Leonard was feeding the ducks when I approached. Tall, lean, with a neatly trimmed gray beard, he always looked like he had just stepped out of a courtroom. "Feds, old fox," he greeted me with our old nickname. "How's it going?" "The usual, Len. Quiet. Too quiet, I'd say." He handed me half his sandwich. "Your daughter come by?" "2 weeks ago. For 15 minutes, I answered. "Brought some herbal tea that's supposed to cleanse my kidneys." Leonard snorted. "Oh, I'm sure that's exactly what you need most." "Well, yeah," I grinned. "Not the insulin I inject myself with every day, but the herbal tea." We both knew I didn't have diabetes. It was our little joke about how Abigail and Harrison were blind to the reality of the situation. "How is your grandson?" Leonard asked. "Trenton?" I shrugged my shoulders. "I have no idea. I haven't seen him in, maybe 3 months. He came by to pick up some old books he'd left at my place. He stayed about 10 minutes, talked on the phone the whole time." "It's a nice family relationship." Leonard shook his head. "Well, he's got his own life. 26 years old, works in the marketing department of some technology company. Abigail and Harrison always told him I didn't understand anything about the modern world." "And he believed that?" "Of course he did. Why wouldn't he believe his own parents?" We were silent, looking at the ducks that swam by the shore, waiting for more bread. "How are things going with those papers I asked you to prepare?" I asked, changing the subject. "Everything is ready. The trust is set up just the way you wanted it. Trenton will only have access to his part of it under certain conditions." "Good," I nodded. "What about the stake in National Way?" "We're holding it through a shell company like we agreed. Abigail and Harrison still don't know that one of the biggest suppliers to their business is partially owned by you." I grinned. National Way is my daughter and son-in-law's organic cosmetics and nutritional supplement company. They were so proud of their independence and the fact that they did it all themselves. If only they knew that I had quietly supported their business from the beginning, referring customers to them through my connections and investing through third parties. "Will you ever tell them?" Leonard asked, wiping his hands with a napkin. "Maybe, when the time comes." We were walking through the park, discussing the latest news. Leonard talked about his grandson going to Stanford, about a recent fishing trip in northern Minnesota, about the new mayor of Rosemount, who he thought was too young and ambitious for his own good. "By the way, have you heard about the new downtown redevelopment project?" he asked. "I've heard something. They want to tear down the old warehouses by the train station and build a shopping center there." "That's right, and you know who's behind it? Harrison Noble. Your brother-in-law is trying to get into the development business." I stopped. "Really? I thought they were all about their organic cosmetics." "Apparently, they've decided to expand, but they're having trouble getting permits. The old warehouses have historical value, and the local preservation society is against demolition." "Interesting." I rubbed my chin thoughtfully. "And what, Harrison can't handle it?" "Apparently not. He needs support on the city council, and he doesn't know anyone there." I chuckled. On the Rosemount City Council, 4 people out of 7 were former colleagues of mine or people I'd once helped. including the chairman, Richard Owens, who started out as an intern with me at Midwest Energy 30 years ago. Well, let him learn to solve problems on his own, I said. You could help with one phone call, Leonard said. I could. But why? They've never asked for my help, never valued my experience and connections. Let them continue to think of me as a useless old man. As we were saying goodbye at the park exit, Leonard clapped me on the shoulder. Don't take it personally, Feds. Children often don't appreciate their parents until they're older. In Abigail's case, I'm afraid that older will never come, I replied. She's 48 now, and she still thinks I'm a burden. She just doesn't know who you really are. And she probably never will, I shrugged. It hadn't bothered me in a long time, but we both knew that wasn't entirely true. On the way home, I stopped by Bristol's, an expensive liquor store on Maple Avenue. The owner, Gregory Perkins, greeted me like an old friend. Mr. Crandall, haven't seen you in a long time. How are you? Not bad, Greg. What do you have that's new and interesting? He led me to the far shelf. Just got a gorgeous Bordeaux 2000 yesterday. I think you'll like it. I selected a bottle and headed for the cash register. There was a young couple at the front of the store, and the girl looked at me in surprise. Grandpa Fergus. I recognized Lorian, my grandson's friend. I had only met her a couple of times, but she was the kind of person who was hard to forget. Bright, with a lively mind that reflected in her eyes. Lorian, what a surprise, I smiled. I didn't know you knew about wine. She nodded at the bottle in my hand. There is some knowledge, I replied modestly. And this is Trenton, I presume. The young man beside her held out his hand. No, sir. I'm Edmund, Lorian's colleague. Trenton is working late tonight. I see, I nodded, shaking his hand. How's my grandson doing? Good, Lorian said, slightly embarrassed. Very busy with work and other things. Mr. Crandall, as usual, put it on your account, Gregory asked. I nodded, noticing the way Lorian's eyebrows crept upward. You have an account here? She wondered. Yes, for years now, I answered. Gregory keeps some rare varieties for me. That's impressive, she said, glancing over at Edmund. Just a little old man hobby, I smiled. Please say hi to Trenton when you see him. I will, she nodded, and I noticed a curiosity in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. At home, I opened a bottle of wine and poured myself a glass. Sitting in my chair, I looked at the picture of Dorothy on the mantelpiece. What would you say, dear? I asked quietly. What would you do if you were me? The telephone interrupted my musings. It was Ralph Baxter. Fergus, got your letter. We need to discuss some details of your investment portfolio. When would it be convenient for you to meet? Anytime, Ralph. You know my schedule's flexible. Okay, how about Monday at 11 o'clock in my office? That's a deal. I finished talking and finished my wine. It was starting to get dark outside. Another day in the silence of my house, with memories of the past. Abigail and Harrison had always thought of me as just a retired man living out his days. They didn't know how wrong they were. The doorbell rang. It was Trenton, a surprise visit. Hi, Grandpa. He stood on the threshold, shuffling nervously from foot to foot. Can I come in? Sure, I stepped back, letting him into the house. He walked into the living room, looking around like he was seeing everything for the first time. Did you want something? I asked, returning to my chair. Yeah, he stammered. I met Lorian and she said she saw you today. Not exactly, I answered. We met by chance at the liquor store. She was with some Edmund. Her co-worker, Trenton said quickly. Look, Grandpa, she mentioned that you have an account at Bristol? Yeah, so? Nothing, it's just that, Mom always said you save every penny. Your mom doesn't know much about me, Trenton, I said calmly. Neither do you. He shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, I guess so. Look, Grandpa, I was going to say, anyway, Lorian and we're going to have a life change soon. Really? I raised an eyebrow, pretending I didn't know what he meant. Yeah, and I wanted you to know that the phone in his pocket rang, interrupting the conversation. He looked at the screen. Sorry, it's Mom. I have to take this. Trenton moved to the window, speaking softly, but I could still hear bits and pieces. Yeah, I'm at his place. No, he hasn't told me yet. All right, I'll be right there. He finished talking and turned to me. Sorry, Grandpa, I have to go. Mom's waiting for me to discuss a matter. Of course, I nodded. You're always busy. We'll talk another time, okay? He was on his way out. Whatever you say, Trenton. I walked him to the door. When he left, I went back into the living room and looked at Dorothy's picture again. You always said that one day they would understand, I whispered. But I'm not sure I'll live to see that day anymore. I poured myself another glass of wine and settled into the chair with a book. The last rays of the setting sun cast a warm, golden glow across the room, and for a moment I thought I saw Dorothy sitting across the room in her favorite chair, smiling at me over her reading glasses. It was a shame that Abigail had taken so little from her mother, her wisdom, her patience, her ability to see through people. Sunday morning was surprisingly sunny for mid-May. I stood at the living room window watching the neighbor's cat trying to catch a butterfly in my front garden. A phone call interrupted this unpretentious amusement. Fergus Crandall here, I answered, expecting to hear the voice of Leonard, who usually called on Sundays. Dad, it's Abigail. Aren't you busy this morning? I was surprised. Sunday calls from my daughter were rare. No, I'm not busy. Is something wrong? No. No, it's just, She's a little slow on the uptake. Harrison and I are going to the farmer's market, and I thought maybe you'd like to join us. There's a flower festival there today. You might be interested. Interesting is not a word I'd use. I wouldn't have believed that Abigail and Harrison suddenly wanted to spend time with me if it hadn't been for the conversation I'd had with Trenton yesterday. Yeah, sure, I replied, deciding to see what was on their minds. Great. We'll pick you up in an hour, okay? I'll be waiting. I thought for a moment as I prepared to leave. Something was definitely going on. First Trenton and his reticence. Now this sudden interest in hanging out with Abigail and Harrison. Well, we'll just have to wait and see. An hour later, punctuality had always been Abigail's strong suit. The Tesla pulled up in front of my house. Harrison greeted me with a nod from the driver's seat. His slightly graying temples and tanned face made him look like an actor in an expensive watch commercial. My son-in-law was always trying to look more successful than he was. Hi, Daddy. Abigail smiled at me from the passenger seat. It's a great day, isn't it? It was, I agreed, settling into the back seat. Harrison immediately started talking about the benefits of their new electric car, as if I hadn't heard this lecture several times already. I nodded in the right places, looking out the streets of Rosemount. The city had changed over the years. Some of the changes were for the better. New parks, a restored library. Others gave me mixed feelings, like the demolition of the old Odeon movie theater where Dorothy and I had seen our first movie together. The farmer's market was located in the central square. It was always crowded on Sundays, but today, because of the flower festival, it was especially crowded. Stalls with colorful bouquets and potted plants were next to stalls filled with fresh vegetables, homemade cheese, and baked goods. We wanted to check out the organic food pavilion, Abigail said as we got out of the car. There are some new vendors there that we're thinking of partnering with for our cosmetics line. Sure, I agreed, already realizing that I'd been recruited for something other than the company. We moved slowly through the crowd. Abigail and Harrison stopped at various counters, talking to the vendors about the quality of their products and the possibilities of cooperation. I stayed a little further back, looking at the floral arrangements and enjoying the morning sun. Fergus? Fergus Crandall, is that really you? I turned around at the loud voice and saw Marcus Weatherby, one of Rosemount's most influential businessmen. Tall, with a military bearing, he was the kind of man whose presence was felt before they even entered the room. Marcus, I smiled and shook his outstretched hand. It's been a long time. Too long. He clapped me on the shoulder with such force that I almost staggered. You're as fit as ever, old boy. You won't believe this, but I was just talking to Richard Owens about you yesterday. Abigail and Harrison, noticing our meeting, interrupted their conversation with the salesman and came closer. I could see the surprise on their faces. Marcus, this is my daughter Abigail and her husband Harrison, I introduced them. Oh, I know about National Way. Marcus shook their hands vigorously. It's a great business you've built. Thank you. Harrison straightened, clearly flattered that a figure like Weatherby knew about their company. We're trying to grow organically. Fergus, that tip you gave me about reorganizing the energy use in my new office complex saved me a lot of money, Marcus continued, turning to me again. The engineers said it was a brilliant solution. I saw Abigail and Harrison exchange incredulous glances. Glad I could help, I replied modestly. It's nothing special, just an old trick we used back at Midwest Energy. Don't be modest, Marcus clapped me on the shoulder again. Listen, Janet and I are having a little dinner next Friday. Nothing formal, just a few friends. You should come. And your family too, of course. He nodded toward Abigail and Harrison. I'll think about it, I replied, knowing I was unlikely to go. Social events had never been my thing, not even when Dorothy was alive. Great. I'll send you the details. Now I have to run. Janet is waiting for me at the Orchid Pavilion. He shook my hand again. And don't forget about that project we talked about. I'm still interested. With those words, Marcus disappeared into the crowd as suddenly as he had appeared. What project? Abigail asked, curious. Nothing much, I shrugged. Just some old business talk. He seems to respect your opinion, Harrison said with a slight perplexity in his voice. Marcus has always been polite to old acquaintances, I replied. We'd worked together on a few projects when he was just starting out. Harrison chuckled. It must have been a long time ago. Now Weatherby is one of the 5 most powerful people in the state. Time flies, I agreed, deliberately not going into the details of my relationship with Marcus. We continued our stroll through the market. Abigail and Harrison were back in their business conversations, but I could see that they were casting thoughtful glances at me. Meeting Marcus wasn't exactly what they had in mind for me. After the market, we stopped by the Green Leaf Cafe, one of those places that served smoothies with unpronounceable names and avocado toast for the price of a good lunch. Abigail insisted I try their amazing organic tea, even though I would have preferred regular black coffee. So, Dad, Abigail began as we settled at the table, we wanted to talk to you about something. Here it is, I thought, sipping the tasteless tea. Trenton has probably already given you a hint, she continued, but we wanted to make it official. He's getting married to Lorian Woodcroft. Congratulations, I said sincerely. Despite my difficult relationship with my daughter and son-in-law, I've always had warm feelings for my grandson, even if we've drifted apart in recent years. Lorian seems like a nice girl. She's lovely, Harrison said enthusiastically. And her family is very respectable. Hubert Woodcroft, her father, owns a chain of clinics all over the Midwest. I nodded. Of course, I knew a lot more about Hubert Woodcroft than they realized. Early in his career, he'd worked for an energy company that was a client of Midwest Energy. I helped him with technical advice when he decided to open his first clinic and ran into energy supply problems. But Abigail and Harrison don't need to know that. The wedding is in 2 months, Abigail continued, at the Oak Ridge Country Club, a very private ceremony, just the closest people. Sounds wonderful, I said. There will be some very important people there, Harrison put in. Business partners of the Woodcroft family, some influential figures from the medical community. I realized where they were going, but I decided not to make it any easier. And how is your project to renovate the center going? I asked, changing the subject. Have you been able to resolve the issue of the historic warehouses? Harrison wrinkled his nose. Not yet. These activists from the Society for the Protection of Monuments are terribly stubborn. They claim the warehouses have some special architectural value. Well, they were actually designed by Franklin Silver, I remarked, one of the most famous 19th century architects in our region. How do you know that? Abigail wondered. I read local history, I shrugged. I have a lot of free time on my hands. Anyway, Harrison continued irritably, they're just old brick boxes. Our shopping center project will do a lot more good for the city. New jobs, tax revenue. Maybe you should consider a compromise, I suggested. Instead of demolition, re-equip the warehouses, preserving their historic shell, but modernizing the interior space. It could be an interesting architectural solution and appease the public. Harrison snorted. It's unprofitable. Remodeling would cost more than building from scratch. Not necessarily, I countered. If you plan it right, you can save a lot of money on the foundation and supporting structures. Besides, such a project would probably get tax benefits as a historic preservation project. Dad, Abigail interjected in that condescending tone that always made me grit my teeth. The construction business has changed a lot since you've been in it. It's a different technology now, a different approach. The economy still works on the same principles, I said calmly. And human psychology, too. People appreciate history and uniqueness. A shopping center in a historic building will attract more visitors than a typical glass box. It's all theory, Harrison said. In practice, investors look at the numbers, and the numbers say that renovation is an unnecessary expense. I wanted to argue that I knew several investors who would be interested in such a project, but I decided not to say anything. Why waste words when they wouldn't listen anyway? In any case, Abigail wanted to get back to the main topic of conversation. We're hoping that the project will be approved by the city council, especially if we can get the support of people like Hubert Woodcroft. Ah, I smiled. So that's what this is all about. You're hoping to use the wedding to make business connections. Not so rude, Dad. Abigail frowned. We just want everything to go perfectly. It's an important day for Trenton. And for your business, I added. For the whole family, Harrison corrected me, including you. That's why we wanted to talk. But he didn't get a chance to finish. An older woman with an elegant haircut and an expensive suit approached our table. Abigail? Harrison? What a pleasure to meet you. I recognized Eleanor Price, head of the city's Chamber of Commerce. Abigail and Harrison immediately broke into smiles. Mrs. Price, how nice to see you. Abigail stood up to exchange pleasantries with her. I was just telling Richard Owens about your project, Eleanor continued. It's a very interesting idea, although, of course, the question of historic buildings is not an easy one. We were just discussing possible compromises, I put in. Eleanor turned to me and smiled broadly. Fergus Crandall, I didn't notice you right away. How is your health? I can't complain, Ellie, I replied, using her old nickname which she allowed only to old friends. Do you two know each other? Harrison asked in surprise. Oh, Fergus and I have known each other for, how long? 40 years. Eleanor winked at me. Since the days when I worked for the Energy Commission, Fergus was always the smartest person in the room, though he never flaunted it. I noticed Abigail and Harrison exchange puzzled looks. Ellie's exaggerating, I said modestly. She'd always been too nice to me. Not at all, she objected. By the way, Fergus, I heard from Marcus Weatherby that you gave him some ingenious energy-saving advice. Maybe I could benefit from some of your wisdom. The Chamber of Commerce is moving into a new building, and the electric bills are astronomical. I'd be happy to help, I agreed. Give me a call this week and we'll work something out. Great, she glowed. Now if you'll excuse me, I have to run. It was nice to see you all. Abigail, Harrison, I hope we can find a solution to your project that will suit everyone. When Eleanor left, There was an awkward silence around the table. "You never said you knew the head of the Chamber of Commerce," Abigail said finally. "You never asked," I said simply. "And what's the story with the counsel for Weatherby?" Harrison continued. "Was he really consulting with you on business?" "Marcus simply asked to look at the energy plans for his new office complex. I noticed a few inefficiencies that could be optimized." "And you know about modern power supply systems?" Harrison asked skeptically. "The fundamentals haven't changed," I shrugged. "New technologies only improve the details." Abigail looked at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. "Why didn't you ever tell us about this? About your connections, about continuing to counsel people?" "Because you were never interested," I answered calmly. "You always thought I was just an old retired man, living out his days, reminiscing about the old days." "That's not true, Daddy," Abigail began, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Let's not. You wanted to talk about Trenton's wedding, didn't you? Let's get back to it." Harrison cleared his throat. "Yes, we wanted to discuss some details." "I'm listening," I said, even though I already knew what they were going to say. "You see, Papa," Abigail began cautiously, "the wedding will be very private, as I said. Very formal. The Woodcroft family has certain traditions. And you're worried that I won't fit in," I finished for her. "It's not that," she countered quickly, though her eyes said otherwise. "It's just a lot of important people are going to be there and we want it to be perfect." "And you think I'm going to ruin anything by being there?" I let some bitterness seep into my voice. "No, Dad, but—" Abigail hesitated. "It's going to be a very tense environment," Harrison interjected. "A lot of business talk, discussions that you might not be interested in. We're just worried that you won't be comfortable." "I appreciate your concern," I said dryly, "but maybe we should let me decide for myself if I'm comfortable or not." "Of course, Daddy." Abigail put her hand on mine. "We just wanted to warn you. Also, Hubert and Victoria Woodcroft are very conservative. They place a great deal of importance certain lifestyles, certain manners. And you're afraid I'll embarrass you with my old-fashioned views and habits," I finished for her again. "We didn't say that," Harrison objected, but without much conviction. I sipped the cooled tea and looked at them both. They were so predictable in their condescension, in their belief that they knew life better than I did. How many times over the years had they brushed off my advice as outdated? How many times have they pretended to listen just out of politeness? "You know what?" I said, setting my cup on the table. "Let Trenton decide for himself if he wants his grandfather at his wedding. If he tells me personally that he'd rather I didn't come, I'll respect his wish." "Trenton certainly wants you there," Abigail said quickly. "But he's so busy preparing, so it's not that important to him," I said. "Anyway, I'm tired. If you don't mind, I'd like to go home." The drive back was passed in tense silence. When we pulled up to my house, Abigail came out with me. "Daddy, I'm sorry if we hurt you in any way," she said when we stopped at the front door. "We just want everything to go well." "I understand," I replied. "But you know, Abigail, sometimes I feel like you don't know me at all. You only see what you want to see, an old man who's interfering with your life." "That's not true," she objected, but not very convincingly. "Never mind," I opened the door. "Tell Trenton I'm expecting his call or visit. If he doesn't want to see me at his wedding, let him have the courage to say it to my face." I closed the door without waiting for her answer and made my way into the living room. Through the window, I watched Abigail stand on the porch for a moment and then walk slowly toward the car. Something in her gait, in the slope of her shoulders, reminded me of Dorothy in those rare moments when we fought. I sighed and sank into the chair. The day that had started so abruptly with an invitation from my daughter had ended with a familiar feeling of alienation. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Leonard's number. "How was the family reunion?" he asked instead of greeting me. "The usual," I answered. They don't want me at their grandson's wedding." "They said that?" "Not directly, but that was the meaning." Leonard was silent for a moment, then asked, "What are you going to do?" "Nothing yet," I answered. "I'm waiting for Trenton to get up the courage to tell me in person." "And if he doesn't?" "Then I'll know I mean even less to my grandson than I thought." I tried to keep my voice steady, but Leonard knew me too well. "Fergus, they're not worth your worry," he said softly. "I know," I replied, "but they're all I have left." "Not all," Leonard objected. "You have friends who appreciate you for who you are, and you are so much more than they will ever realize." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Thanks, Len. I'll see you in the park tomorrow." "As usual," he confirmed. "And, Fergus, don't let them make you feel less than you are." I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time, looking at Dorothy's picture. She always said that Abigail would someday realize what kind of person I really was, but with each passing year, that hope seemed more and more elusive, and yet something was different today. I saw the uncertainty in my daughter's eyes when Marcus and Eleanor spoke to me as an equal, as someone whose opinion they valued. Perhaps for the first time in years, Abigail began to think about her father being more than just a burden. Too late, perhaps, but at least it was a start. It had been 3 days since we'd met at the cafe, and there had been no call or visit from Trenton. I wasn't surprised. The boy always went with the flow, preferring to avoid unpleasant conversations. He was just like his mother in that. It was early Tuesday morning when the phone rang. I was just making tea, not the herbal blends Abigail had brought, but a good, strong Assam I'd ordered from a small store in Minneapolis. "Fergus Crandall here," I answered, though I already knew who was calling. "Dad, it's Abigail. Are you busy?" "I'm having breakfast. What's up?" She was quiet for a second, then she blurted out, "We had a long discussion with Harrison and the Woodcroft family. Anyway, we decided it would be best if you didn't come to Trenton's wedding. That's all. No explanation from Trenton himself, no face-to-face conversation. Just a phone call from a daughter who couldn't even find the right words." "I see," I said calmly. You're not upset?" There was surprise in her voice. Should I be? Well, I thought, it's your only grandson's wedding. "Yeah, and you decided I shouldn't be there. I heard you, Abigail." "Dad, it's not that simple. There's going to be some very important people there and the format of the event." "You don't have to explain," I interrupted her. "It's your decision and I accept it." "Really?" She was clearly expecting objections, arguments, insults, anything but this calm acceptance. "Yes, Abigail, I do." "Okay," she faltered. Then I'm glad you understand." "Of course I do. Anything else?" "No, that's it. I'll call you the other day to see how you're doing." "Don't worry, I'm fine." I hung up and went back to my breakfast. The tea was cold, but it didn't matter. A plan was already starting to form in my head. After breakfast, I pulled out the notebook I kept in my desk drawer. Old-fashioned, leather-bound, with worn pages, it contained contacts of people I'd worked with over the decades. Many of the numbers were probably long out of date, but some connections I kept in touch with regularly. The first call I made was to Ralph Baxter. We arranged to meet in an hour at his office in the Rosemount Business Center. Ralph preferred face-to-face meetings when it came to important financial decisions, and I respected that. Ralph's office was located on the 4th floor of a modern glass and concrete building. Despite appearances of modesty, his financial consulting firm managed significant assets, including some of my investments. "Fergus," Ralph greeted me with a firm handshake. Tall, trim, with a neatly trimmed gray beard, he looked younger than his 65 years. "It's good to see you. Tea? Coffee?" "No, thank you." I settled into the chair across from his desk. "I don't have much time." "Then let's get down to business." He nodded and opened a file on his computer. You said on the phone that you wanted to review your investment structure. Yes. I need a full accounting of my assets, especially those related to National Way and their suppliers. Ralph raised an eyebrow. Does this have something to do with your daughter? Perhaps. He sighed. Fergus, I've known you for 30 years. What's going on? I told him about Abigail's call and the decision not to invite me to my grandson's wedding. I'm sorry, Ralph said when I was done. It's not fair. But are you sure you want to use financial leverage in a family conflict? I'm not going to ruin their business if that's what you mean, I replied. I just want them to realize that I'm not the kind of helpless old man you can ignore. Ralph nodded and began to display information about my assets. So, your investment portfolio. Total value to date is $4,600,000. This includes stocks, bonds, real estate, and a few private investments in startups. He continued, going into detail. Through your holding company, Oak Ridge Investments, you own 15% of Midwest Natural Ingredients, the primary supplier of raw materials to your daughter's company. They don't know this, since you've always insisted on confidentiality. Who else is on the board of directors of Natural Ingredients? I asked. James Howard, Peter Montgomery, and Susan Chang, Ralph replied as he looked through the documents. You're familiar with all three of them? Yes, I nodded. I've known James for a long time and we've invested in several projects together. There's something else, Ralph continued. Do you remember that shopping center on Oak Street where the headquarters of National Way are located? The real estate fund you invested in 5 years ago bought a controlling interest in the management company of that center 3 months ago. I smiled. It was an unexpectedly fortunate coincidence. So theoretically, I could influence the terms of their lease. Theoretically, yes, Ralph answered cautiously. But, Fergus, I wouldn't recommend such drastic measures. It could have unpredictable consequences. I'm just exploring the options, I reassured him. What else? Ralph continued listing my assets, shares in several investment funds, minority stakes in local businesses, real estate in and around Rosemount. Thanks to successful investments in technology startups in the 90s and good management, my fortune was far beyond what one would expect from a retired engineer. What about the downtown redevelopment project? I asked. The one Harrison's doing. I checked it like you asked. Ralph opened another file. The land with the warehouses is really interesting for investors, but due to problems with the historical status of the buildings, the project has stalled. Harrison is trying to get a demolition permit through the city council, but so far without success. Who at the Historical Society is in charge of the case? Margaret Holmes, Ralph replied. She chairs the Rosemount Historic Preservation Committee. I nodded. Margaret was an old friend of Dorothy's. They worked together at the local library when we first moved to Rosemount. Good. What else can you tell me about the Woodcroft family? Ralph pulled out another folder. Hubert Woodcroft, 62, owner of Woodcroft Health, a chain of medical clinics. Estimated fortune of approximately $40 million. Married to Victoria Woodcroft, née Stanton. 2 children. Son Jeffrey, age 32, works in the family business, and daughter Lorian, age 25, recently completed her master's degree in business administration at Northwestern University. Any skeletons in the closet? I inquired. Nothing serious. Ralph shook his head. Hubert is a respected member of the community, donates to charity, participates in various community initiatives. The only thing to note is that his clinics have been accused of overcharging for services several times, but it never went to court. And his relations with other businessmen in the region? As far as I know, he has good connections in medical circles. He's on the board of directors of the Midwest Medical Association and is a frequent speaker at various conferences. I wondered. The name Hubert Woodcroft had seemed familiar to me even before Trenton had started dating Lorian. Perhaps our paths had crossed in the past. Thank you, Ralph. I stood up. That's very useful information. Fergus, he stood up too. I understand your feelings, but please don't do anything rash. Family conflicts are best solved by talking, not by financial pressure. Sometimes talking doesn't work, I replied, especially when one side refuses to listen. I left Ralph's office with a clear understanding of my financial situation and possible leverage. The next step was to contact James Howard of Midwest Natural Ingredients. We agreed to meet at the Forest Corner restaurant outside of town, a quiet place where we could talk quietly without the risk of being overheard. James was already waiting for me at a table in the far corner. Fergus. He came up to shake my hand. 15 years younger than me, but with a noticeable gray in his hair, James retained the energy and sharp mind that had helped him build a successful business. It's good to see you. When you called, I was surprised. You rarely take an active interest in the company's affairs. Circumstances have changed, I said, sitting down. I need some information about National Way. James raised an eyebrow. Your daughter's company? We've been supplying them with raw materials for several years now, one of our largest customers in the region. What's your relationship with them like? Generally good, he shrugged. They are demanding about quality, which is understandable, given their positioning in the organic cosmetics market. Sometimes there are delays in payments, but nothing critical. Who usually negotiates with you? Abigail or Harrison? Usually Harrison, James replied. He's in charge of purchasing and logistics. Abigail is more involved in marketing and product development. I nodded. And what kind of impression does Harrison make? James paused, searching for words. He's ambitious, always trying to squeeze maximum discounts, sometimes using unethical arguments. For example, he threatens to go to a competitor, even though we know perfectly well that no one else will offer them such quality at our prices. Interesting. I took a sip of water from my glass. James, I want to change my status in the company, not to be a quiet investor anymore. He straightened up. You want to join the board of directors? Not exactly. I want you to renegotiate the terms of cooperation with Natural Way. Nothing drastic, a small price increase, stricter payment terms. May I ask why? James asked cautiously. It's your daughter's business. Let's just say I need a little lesson in how the real world works, I replied. Harrison and Abigail are too used to things going smoothly. James nodded, not asking any more questions. Over the years, he'd learned to respect my decisions, even if he didn't always understand my motives. I'll convene the board of directors next week, he said. We'll discuss a new pricing policy for key customers. Thank you, James. And one more request. No one must know about my role in this. Of course, Fergus. Confidentiality has always been the foundation of our relationship. We finished lunch discussing other business matters and local news. James talked about his new project, environmentally friendly production of ingredients for the food industry, and I gave some tips on optimizing energy consumption. Old habits of an engineer die hard. After meeting James, I decided to pay Margaret Holmes a visit. Her small house on Elm Street looked exactly as it had 20 years ago, when Dorothy and I had often been here for Sunday tea parties. Margaret, a thin woman with neatly styled gray hair, opened the door and shook her hands. Fergus Crandall, what a surprise. Come in, come in. I've just put the kettle on. I went into a living room filled with books, antique furniture, and framed photographs. One of them was of Dorothy, she and Margaret in front of the town library, both young, smiling. My heart snapped at the memory. How are you, Fergus? Margaret asked, pouring tea into china cups. I haven't seen much of you these last few years. I'm hanging in there, I replied. And you're still as active in social life as I've heard. She smiled. Oh, you mean my work at the Historical Society? Yes, it takes a lot of time, but someone has to keep the memory of the town's past alive. I hear you have a hot topic right now, The warehouses by the railroad station. Oh yes, she perked up. These beautiful 19th century buildings want to be torn down and another faceless shopping center built. We're fighting hard, but the developers have big connections. Harrison Noble. I nodded. My brother-in-law. Margaret was embarrassed. Oh, Fergus, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't know you had anything to do with this project. I'm not, I reassured her. In fact, I think you're doing the right thing by protecting these buildings. They do have historical value. They do? She brightened. I'm so glad you're supporting us. Dorothy always said you had a sense of history despite your fondness for new technology. I smiled. Dorothy knew me well. Margaret, I was wondering, is there any way to not just preserve these buildings but to give them new life? Maybe some kind of compromise between historic preservation and modern use? She thought, we propose the concept of adaptive reuse, keeping the facades and basic architectural elements but modernizing the interior space. It's a common practice in historic districts in major cities. But Mr. Noble rejected the idea as unprofitable. What if there was an investor willing to finance such a project? I asked. Someone who valued historical heritage and was willing to invest in its preservation. Margaret's eyes lit up. That would be perfect. We could even organize a public campaign in support of such an investor. Fergus, do you know anyone who might be interested? Perhaps, I answered evasively. I'll make inquiries and let you know. We talked for another hour or so, reminiscing about old times and discussing the changes in Rosemount. Margaret showed me archival photos of the warehouses they were trying to protect and told me about their historical significance. I listened attentively, realizing that this information might prove useful. As I left, I promised to stop by again soon and perhaps bring some good news about a potential investor for the renovation project. Back home, I sat down at the computer, one of the few modern technologies I had mastered quite well. I needed to find information about Hubert Woodcroft that might confirm my vague memories of our possible meeting in the past. After an hour of searching, I found what I was looking for, an old article in the 1987-year-old trade journal Midwest Power. It mentioned a young professional named Hubert Woodcroft who worked for Green Energy, one of Midwest Energy's clients. I remembered we had actually met at a meeting to optimize the energy supply for a new clinic he was planning to open after leaving the energy industry. I helped him at the time by suggesting some innovative solutions that significantly reduced his energy costs. Woodcroft was impressed and even sent a letter of thanks to my superiors. But that was over 30 years ago, and I doubted he would remember me. Still, it was a lead. I dialed Leonard's number. "Len, I need your help," I said when he answered. "Can you arrange a meeting with Hubert Woodcroft, with the father of Trenton's fiancée?" Leonard was surprised. Why? I explained my idea and what I'd learned during the day. Interesting, Leonard said when I was done, but risky. Are you sure you want to go this way? Yes, I answered firmly. Abigail and Harrison had decided that I wasn't worthy of attending my grandson's wedding. It was time they realized that their decisions could have consequences. All right, Leonard sighed. I'll try to arrange a meeting. I have contacts in medical circles, someone who should know how to reach Woodcroft. Thanks, Len. One more thing, see if we have any leverage with the management company of the shopping center where National Way's office is located. Ralph said the investment fund I invested in took a controlling interest. Fergus, you're playing with fire, Leonard warned. This could seriously damage your daughter's business. I'm not going to ruin them, I assured him. I just want them to feel that the world isn't always kind to those who don't respect others. After my conversation with Leonard, I sat in my chair for a long time, looking at Dorothy's picture. What would she say about my plans? Would she approve or disapprove? Dorothy had always been kinder than me, always looking for peaceful solutions to conflicts. But sometimes, as she herself recognized, kindness and patience don't work. Sometimes you have to show your strength to be respected. And now was that time. Abigail and Harrison had spent too long thinking of me as a helpless old man living in the past. It was time to show them that this old man still had teeth. I picked up the phone and dialed another number from my address book. Peter Montgomery, a board member of Midwest Natural Ingredients and an old golf club buddy, answered after the third beep. "Peter? It's Fergus Crandall. It's been a while. How about a round of golf this Saturday? I've got an interesting business proposition I think you might be interested in." The wheels started turning. In the course of one day, I set in motion several processes that would set my plan in motion. It wasn't revenge in its purest form, more like a lesson for Abigail and Harrison. A lesson that family ties were more important than business ambitions, and that respect should be earned, not demanded. And if that lesson required using my hidden assets and connections, so be it. After all, I've worked all my life not just for money, but for the safety and well-being of my family, even if that family didn't always appreciate me the way I deserved. The following days turned into a kaleidoscope of meetings, phone calls, and strategic planning for me. I hardly slept at all, waking up at first light and staying up late on paperwork and the computer. Strangely, this activity gave me an energy I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if the years had fallen away and I was back to being that energetic project manager who solved complex problems and coordinated teams. Leonard joked that I looked about 20 years younger. "I see you've got that little vendetta going on, Feds. Your eyes are as bright as a young man's." "It's not a vendetta," I objected, though I knew in my heart that there was an element of personal offense in my actions. "It's a lesson. Call it what you want," Leonard shrugged, "as long as you don't regret it." Regret? Maybe. But I was too absorbed in the process to think about the consequences. The first result of my actions was not long in coming. 3 days after my conversation with James Howard, I got a call from Abigail. I was on my way to a meeting with Peter Montgomery, and I was surprised to see her name on the phone screen. "Dad?" Her voice sounded strained. "Do you have a minute to talk?" "Sure," I answered, glancing at my watch. "But make it quick. I'm leaving soon." "Where to?" She sounded genuinely surprised, as if the idea that I might have something to do seemed strange to her. "To a meeting," I answered shortly. "What's up?" She paused for a second, then blurted out, "We're having trouble with natural ingredients. They suddenly raised their prices 20% and tightened their payment terms. Harrison has tried to negotiate with them, but they're adamant." "Very unpleasant," I said in a neutral tone. "But why are you calling me? What can I do for you?" "I thought—" She hesitated. "You've worked in this industry for years. Maybe you still have some contacts. Someone who could help us find another supplier or influence natural ingredients." That's it. When the pressure was on, the old man came to mind. "Abigail, that was a long time ago," I replied. "Most of my contacts are retired or—" I paused. "They're no longer with us." "I see." The disappointment in her voice was almost palpable. "It's just really unfortunate. We've got enough expenses with Trenton's wedding, and then there's this blow to business." "Life is full of surprises," I said philosophically. "Sometimes you have to adapt to new circumstances." "Yeah, you're right," she sighed. "Well, I won't keep you. Good luck with your meeting." I hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and slight guilt. The plan was working, but the sight of my daughter's anxiety had always been painful to me, even now that I was the cause of that anxiety myself. The meeting with Peter Montgomery went well. We played 9 holes of golf, during which I gently steered the conversation to the subject of natural ingredients and their new pricing policy. "James said it was your idea," Peter remarked, aiming for a shot. We were all surprised. You don't usually get involved in operational management. "It was time to get a little more involved in the company," I replied, "especially since I was one of the first investors." And this has nothing to do with the fact that National Way is your daughter's business? Peter smiled slyly, taking a jab. Everything is connected, I answered evasively. By the way, I heard that Richard Owens is seeking peer review for the warehouse renovation project near the railroad station. Peter turned to me sharply. Really? I've been trying to get the contract for this project for a long time. My consulting firm specializes in this kind of renovation. I know, I nodded. That's why I mentioned it. Maybe I could put in a good word for you. Richard and I are old friends. That would be terrific, Fergus. Peter's eyes lit up. Is there anything I can do for you in return? Nothing much. I waved my hand nonchalantly. Just support Natural Ingredients' new pricing policy, and maybe take a closer look at National Way's financial statements. I have some concerns about their solvency. Consider it done. Peter nodded understandingly. Thus, one by one, I began to move the pieces on my invisible chessboard. The next step was to meet Hubert Woodcroft. Leonard was on top of things, arranging for us to meet at the Rolling Hills Golf Club, where Hubert was a regular member. I deliberately arrived early and settled into a cozy chair in the lounge area overlooking the immaculately manicured golf course. Hubert arrived exactly at the appointed time, a trait I've always appreciated in business associates. Mr. Crandall, he extended his hand. Hubert Woodcroft, nice to meet you. He didn't recognize me, which wasn't surprising. Our only meeting was over 3 decades ago, and I was just one of the many specialists he consulted. Likewise, Mr. Woodcroft, I replied, shaking his hand. Thank you for taking the time. Hubert sat down across from me. He was a tall, trim man with neatly trimmed gray hair and the confident look of a man accustomed to authority. I confess I am intrigued, he said. Leonard Prosser said you had something to do with me, but he didn't specify what it was. It concerns your daughter, Lorian, I began. More specifically, her upcoming marriage to my grandson, Trenton Noble. Hubert's eyebrows rose. You're Trenton's grandfather? I didn't expect you to be. He's never mentioned you. We haven't been very close in recent years, I admitted, which is what brought me to you. I told him about not being invited to the wedding, trying not to sound resentful or pathetic, just stating the facts. But before we go any further, Mr. Woodcroft, let me ask you this. Do you remember Midwest Energy and the power project for your first clinic in 1987? Hubert furrowed his brow, trying to remember. Of course I remember Midwest Energy. They advised us on. His eyes widened. Wait a minute. You were the engineer who came up with the innovative energy-saving system. Crandall. Yes, now I remember. You saved me a fortune on electricity. I smiled. Glad you remembered. It was an interesting challenge. Unbelievable, Hubert shook his head. What a small world. And you say you weren't invited to your grandson's wedding? That's right, I confirmed. My daughter and son-in-law thought I would be inappropriate for such an event. Hubert frowned. That's strange. I've met Abigail and Harrison several times, and they seem like reasonable people. Oh, they are reasonable, I agreed. It's just that they think I'm old-fashioned and unable to fit into their modern world of business and socializing. Rude and disrespectful, Hubert shook his head. In my family, we value the older generation and their experience. I'm glad to hear that, I nodded. That's why I'd like to ask you to meet Lorian. Lorian? He was surprised. Why? I want to meet my grandson's future wife, I explained, to get to know her better. Maybe through her, I can mend my relationship with Trenton, which has been strained in recent years. Strained. Hubert thought for a moment. It's a reasonable request. Lorian is an intelligent girl with a strong character. If anyone can help in a situation like this, it's her. I would be very grateful, I said. All right, I'll arrange a meeting with you, Hubert decided. But, Mr. Crandall, I must ask you, do you have no other motive for this meeting? No. Plans that might embarrass my daughter? I looked him straight in the eye. Mr. Woodcroft, I'm an engineer, not a schemer. I just want to meet the girl who will become part of my family, even if my family itself prefers to keep me at a distance. That was the truth, though not the whole truth. I did want to meet Lorian, but I also hoped that she might be the key to my plan. Hubert seemed satisfied with my answer. Good. I'll talk to Lorian and let you know about a possible meeting. We spent another hour or so discussing changes in the energy industry over the past decades, developments in the medical business, and mutual acquaintances. Hubert proved to be an interesting conversationalist with a broad outlook and a sharp mind. I began to understand why his daughter was attracted to my grandson. You couldn't grow up with superficial people in such a family. As I left the golf club, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Another step of my plan had been accomplished, and even more successfully than I had expected. Hubert had not only agreed to help arrange a meeting with Lorian, but he seemed to have taken a liking to me. That could be a valuable asset in the future. When I returned home, I found 3 missed calls from Abigail and 1 from Harrison. It seemed the situation with natural ingredients was getting more and more tense. I decided not to call back right away and let them worry a little more. Instead, I called Ralph Baxter to get an update on the mall where the Nickeraway office was located. "I have good news, Fergus," Ralph said after exchanging greetings. "I've spoken to the manager of the company. Since our foundation now controls the majority of the shares, we can influence the rental policy. The contract with National Way expires in 3 months, and now would be a good time to start negotiating an extension." "Great," I said. "But don't rush it. Let them take the initiative first." "I understand," Ralph sounded cautious. "But Fergus, I still think it's a risky path. If they find out about your role—" "They won't," I assured him. "At least, not until I decide to tell them myself." After I'd talked to Ralph, I checked my email, another modern technology I'd mastered despite Abigail and Harrison's stereotypes of my technological backwardness. Among the emails was one from Margaret Holmes, informing me that the Historical Society was willing to consider alternative proposals for renovating the warehouses and would be happy to meet with a potential investor interested in preserving the historic appearance of the buildings. I replied that such an investor did indeed exist and was working on a specific proposal that would soon be presented to the society. I was not lying. I was indeed planning to become that investor, although I had not yet revealed my identity. In the evening, as I was about to go to bed, the phone rang. It was Hubert Woodcroft. "Mr. Crandall, I spoke to Lorian about your request," he said without preamble. "She's agreed to meet you for lunch tomorrow, at the Garden Terrace restaurant at noon. Does that suit you?" "Absolutely," I replied. "Thank you very much for your help, Mr. Woodcroft." "Call me Hubert," he said. "After all, our children, you might say, bring our families together." "Then you can call me Fergus," I suggested. "All right, Fergus. He paused. "I hope your conversation with Lorian will be productive. She's very worried about this whole situation." "Does she know I wasn't invited to the wedding?" I wondered. "Yes, and she's not happy about it," Hubert said. "But you'd better discuss it with her in person." After talking to Hubert, I couldn't sleep for a long time thinking about my upcoming meeting with Lorian. What would I tell her? How would I explain the situation without making Abigail and Harrison look too negative? After all, for all their faults, they were her future husband's parents. The morning brought another call from Abigail. This time I decided to answer it. "Dad, we really need your help," she began without preamble. "The situation is becoming critical. Not only have natural ingredients raised their prices, but they're demanding payment in advance for the next deliveries. Very unpleasant," I said neutrally, "but I still don't see how I can help. Harrison thinks that someone is deliberately trying to hurt our business," Abigail continued. "First, the price hikes, and now the problems with the office lease. The management company of the mall has suddenly announced that there will be a significant rent increase when the lease is renewed. Maybe it's just a coincidence, I suggested. The economic situation is changing and prices are rising. So dramatically, all at once? There was desperation in her voice. Dad, you've been in business for years. What would you do if you were us? I wondered. Part of me wanted to keep playing the game, but the other part, the paternal part, couldn't bear to see my daughter suffer, even if I was the cause of it. I would start looking for alternative suppliers, I finally said, and at the same time I'd consider moving to another location if the lease became unacceptable. We're already trying, Abigail sighed, but the quality of ingredients from other suppliers is lower, and moving the office would cost a lot of money, not to mention the loss of customers who are used to our location. Then maybe you should rethink your business model, I suggested. Cut costs in other areas, raise product prices to offset rising costs. We can't raise prices now, Abigail objected. Our sales are already down because of the recession, and there's no room to cut costs. We're already operating at the bare minimum. Then I don't know what else to suggest, I said honestly. Business is always a risk, Abigail. Sometimes you have to make tough decisions. Thanks for the advice, Dad. I could hear the disappointment in her voice. I was just hoping you might have some contacts or ideas to help us out of this situation. After talking to Abigail, I felt a prick of conscience. Had I been too harsh? Had I gone too far in my desire to teach a lesson? But then I remembered the cold, business-like tone she'd used to inform me that I wasn't invited to my grandson's wedding, and my resolve returned. I packed up and went to meet Lorian at the Garden Terrace restaurant. It was an elegant place with an open veranda buried in greenery and flowers. I arrived a little before the appointed time and chose a table in a quiet corner overlooking the manicured garden. At exactly noon, Lorian appeared. I recognized her immediately, the same lively eyes I'd noticed when we'd met briefly at the liquor store. She was dressed simply but tastefully. Light pants, a pastel-colored blouse, and a minimum of jewelry. None of the ostentatious luxury one might expect from the daughter of a wealthy man. Mr. Crandall? She approached the table, extending her hand. Lorian Woodcroft, nice to meet you. Likewise, I stood up, shaking her hand. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We sat down, and after we ordered, Lorian got right to the point. My father said you weren't invited to the wedding. Is that true? Yes, I confirmed. Abigail called me a week ago and informed me of the decision. Did Trenton know? She asked, looking at me carefully. I'm not sure, I admitted. We haven't spoken since then, but I think he knows, and I think he agrees with his parents' decision. Lorian shook her head. I don't think so. When I mentioned you after we met at the liquor store, he seemed surprised that I knew you, but didn't seem to mind your presence at the wedding. That was new information. Perhaps Trenton wasn't as unanimous with his parents as I had assumed. In any case, Lorian continued, I think this decision is wrong. A wedding is a family event, and all close relatives should be invited. Perhaps Abigail and Harrison think I wouldn't fit into the format of the event, I said. They've always thought of me as outdated. Lorian snorted. That's ridiculous. I only spent 5 minutes with you in that store, and I already realized that you were more interesting and deeper than you looked. And when my father told me that you helped him at the beginning of his career. He remembers that? I wondered. Of course, Lorian smiled. Father never forgets those who helped him. He says your advice on energy conservation was key to the success of his first clinic. We continued our conversation, moving smoothly from the subject of marriage to discussing our interests, outlooks on life, books, and movies. Lorian proved to be an intelligent and educated conversationalist, with clear convictions and an unexpected sense of humor. The more we talked, the more I realized why Trenton had chosen her. You know, she said as we were finishing our dessert, I think I can help resolve this situation. I'll talk to Trenton and try to convince him that your presence at the wedding is important. I'd appreciate it, I said sincerely. But I don't want to cause any problems between you and your future in-laws. Don't worry about that, Lorian said confidently. I know how to take a stand, and Trenton respects that. By the way, she leaned closer, I heard that National Way is having some problems with suppliers and office rent. Abigail and Harrison are very concerned. Yes, Abigail called me this morning, I confirmed. It's a tricky situation. Do you happen to know of anyone who might be able to help them? Lorian asked with genuine concern. Maybe you have some connections in the business community? I looked into her open, friendly face and suddenly felt I couldn't continue my game. This girl genuinely wanted to help and didn't deserve to be a pawn in my plan. Lorian, I said seriously, there's something you should know about the situation with Natural Way. I told her about my investments and how I had secretly influenced Abigail and Harrison's business all these years. About how, after refusing to invite me to their wedding, I decided to show them that I wasn't the helpless old man they thought I was. About my leverage with the vendors and the mall management company. About my conversation with her father and the fact that I hoped to use her to finally teach Abigail and Harrison a lesson. Lorian listened intently, not interrupting. Her face remained calm, but her eyes gradually widened with surprise. This is impressive, she said when I was done, and a little scary, to be honest. I understand, I nodded, and I'm not proud of some of my actions. But years of neglect and condescension, they accumulate, Lorian. I can understand that, she twirled her coffee cup thoughtfully. But don't you think there's a more direct way to solve the problem? Like gathering everyone around a table and just telling the truth? I grinned. Do you think they'll believe it? Or will they think it's the ramblings of an old man trying to seem more important than he is? They'll believe it if you have proof, Lorian said firmly. And if you talk to them in front of witnesses whose word they can't distrust. Like what? I asked, though I already knew what she was getting at. Like my father, she smiled, and perhaps some of your business associates, people Abigail and Harrison respect and whose opinions they can't ignore. The idea was a good one, even better than my original plan of gradual pressure, which could have had unpredictable consequences. Perhaps you're right, I agreed. But how do you organize such a meeting? Abigail and Harrison wouldn't come if I invited them. Leave that to me, Lorian said with a confident nod. I'll say I want to discuss some details of the wedding with my father. They won't be able to refuse. And Trenton? I asked. Should he be there? He has to be, Lorian said firmly. He needs to know the truth about his grandfather and how you were treated by his parents. We agreed on the details. The meeting was to take place 3 days later in the conference room of the Riverside Business Center, owned by an old friend of mine, Robert Montgomery. Lorian had taken it upon herself to arrange for her family, Trenton, Abigail, and Harrison to attend, while I was to prepare all the necessary documents and invite a few key witnesses. As we were saying goodbye, Lorian suddenly put her arm around me. You know, Mr. Crandall, I'm glad we met. Trenton is going to have a wonderful grandfather. And I'm getting a wonderful granddaughter, I replied, suddenly moved. The next 3 days were spent in intense preparation. I gathered all the documents to prove my investment and financial status, arranged for James Howard and Ralph Baxter to attend the meeting, and prepared a detailed presentation on how I had influenced the business of National Way over the years. Leonard, recognizing my plan, shook his head. Are you sure you want to go all in, Feds? It could ruin your relationship with your daughter forever. What relationship, Len? I grinned bitterly. They've long been reduced to polite phone calls on holidays and occasional visits when they need something. It can't get any worse, or better, he said thoughtfully. Sometimes the truth, no matter how bitter, clears the air. That's what we'll find out, I nodded. On the day of the meeting, I arrived at the Riverside an hour before the scheduled time. Robert personally escorted me to the conference room, where chairs were already set up and a projector was ready for the presentation. "Nervous?" he asked, clapping me on the shoulder. "A little," I admitted. "Family, after all." "They started it," Robert reminded me. "Besides, you're not going to ruin them, are you? You're just showing them that you can't be treated like nothing." I nodded, grateful for the encouragement. Gradually, the rest of the meeting began to arrive. James Howard and Ralph Baxter were the first to arrive, followed by Hubert Woodcroft and his wife Victoria, an elegant woman with a penetrating gaze. Lorian and Trenton appeared together, and I noticed that my grandson looked somewhat puzzled. Abigail and Harrison were the last to arrive. Their faces changed from surprised to puzzled when they saw me at the head of the table. "Dad? What are you doing here?" Abigail asked. "I organized this meeting," I answered calmly. Or rather, Lorian and I did. "What's going on?" Harrison frowned, shifting his gaze from me to Hubert Woodcroft. "I thought we were going to discuss the details of the wedding." "And we will," Lorian interjected. "But first, there are more important matters that need clarification." "Please have a seat," I pointed to the empty seats. "We have a long conversation." When everyone was seated, I stood up and looked around. My daughter and son-in-law looked wary. Trenton looked confused. The Woodcroft family looked interested. And James and Ralph looked a little uncomfortable, realizing that some sort of family showdown was about to take place. "I've gathered you here to clear up some misunderstandings," I began, "and to reveal a truth I've been hiding for too long." I turned on the projector, and the first slide of the Midwest Natural Ingredients logo appeared on the screen. "Abigail, Harrison, you recently had a problem with a supplier, correct? Sudden price increases, stricter payment terms?" They exchanged surprised looks. "Yes, but what does that have to do with you?" Abigail asked. I nodded to James Howard, and he stood up. "I'm James Howard, CEO of Midwest Natural Ingredients. Mr. Noble, we've met with you several times to discuss supplies. What you didn't know is that one of our largest shareholders is Mr. Crandall. He owns 15% of the company through a holding company called Oak Ridge Investments." "What?" Harrison looked like he'd been hit over the head. "That's impossible." "It is possible." I moved on to the next slide, which showed documents proving my involvement in the company. I invested in Natural Ingredients 20 years ago when they were just starting out. It was one of my many investments. "Many?" Abigail asked, her voice shaking. "Yes," I nodded and moved on to the next slide, which gave an overview of my investment portfolio. During my years at Midwest Energy, I had not only earned a salary, but also advised young companies, often receiving a stake in them as payment. Some of these investments proved to be very successful. I continued, methodically revealing details of my financial position and influence, told how I supported Abigail and Harrison's business through third parties, referring clients to them and securing favorable terms from suppliers, about how an investment fund in which I had a significant stake had acquired a controlling interest in the management company of their office building. As I spoke, Abigail and Harrison's faces changed. Disbelief was replaced by shock, then confusion, and finally realization. "All these years," Abigail whispered. "All these years you could have helped us, and you didn't say anything." "I was helping," I countered. "I just did it quietly without drawing attention to myself, because I knew that if I told you, you wouldn't believe me, or you'd feel obligated, and I wanted you to go your own way, to be proud of your accomplishments." "But why now?" Harrison asked, his face flushed with a mixture of emotions. "Why are you suddenly using your influence against us?" "Because you crossed the line," I answered, and for the first time there was bitterness in my voice. "You decided I wasn't worthy of attending my own grandson's wedding. You've treated me for years like a helpless old man whose advice is outdated, whose presence in your life is a chore, not a joy. And I've decided to show you that I'm much more than you thought. There was a heavy silence in the room. Trenton looked shocked, shifting his gaze from me to his parents. "Is it true?" he finally asked. "You didn't invite Grandpa to my wedding?" We thought it would be for the best," Abigail began to defend herself. "You know how important people are going to be there, and we were afraid that Daddy would—" I said. "I what?" I interrupted. "Would I embarrass you with my old-fashioned manners, say the wrong thing, or just by my presence remind you that you come from an ordinary family and not from those circles in which you are so eager to enter?" "I didn't know anything about it," Trenton said, looking at his parents with disappointment. "How could you make this decision without me? This is my wedding." "We meant well," Harrison muttered, but even he seemed to realize how lame that sounded. "Mr. Crandall," Hubert Woodcroft intervened, "I must say I'm impressed. Not just your financial situation, but the way you've quietly supported your family all these years without asking for recognition or thanks." "Thank you, Hubert," I nodded, "but this isn't about money or influence. It's about respect. It's about recognizing that a man can be valuable even at an advanced age, even if his views seem outdated." "I completely agree," Victoria Woodcroft said. It was her first words of the entire meeting, and everyone turned to look at her. "In our family, we have always honored our elders, valued their wisdom and experience. I'm sorry you had to face that attitude from your own children." Abigail lowered her head, looking truly ashamed for the first time. "Dad, we," she stammered. "We didn't know. We really thought that I was just an old man living on retirement and memories," I finished for her. "I know, and that's exactly what I let you think, because I never felt the need to brag about my accomplishments or wealth." "But why did you keep it from us?" Abigail asked with a hint of resentment in her voice. "We're your family." "Family?" I grinned bitterly. "Family is people who support each other, who respect each other, who spend time together not out of obligation but out of desire. When was the last time you just stopped by to talk to me? When you took an interest in my life, in my thoughts, rather than just asking if I'd taken my medication and fixed my creaking wicket?" Abigail and Harrison were silent, unable to find the words. Trenton looked like he was seeing his grandfather for the first time. "Grandfather, I didn't know," he said finally. "All these years Mom and Dad said you were, well, just a retired guy. That you weren't really interested in the modern world, that your views were outdated. And you believed them without trying to make up your own mind," I said without reproach, just stating the fact. "Yes," Trenton admitted, "and I'm ashamed of it." Lorian, sitting next to him, took his hand. "What matters is not what has happened, but what will happen next. Mr. Crandall has gathered us here not to seek revenge or demand an apology, but to set new rules. Isn't that right, Mr. Crandall?" I nodded gratefully at her. "That's right. I'm not going to ruin your business or interfere with your life, but I will no longer allow myself to be treated like a burden or an inconvenient reminder of my humble origins." "What do you want us to do?" Harrison asked directly. "Respect," I answered simply. "Recognition that I'm still a full member of this family, with my rights and dignity. And yes, I want to attend my grandson's wedding, if that's what he wants." "Of course I want to," Trenton said quickly. "You should be there, grandfather, and not just attend, but take the place of honor." Abigail and Harrison looked at each other, clearly realizing they had no choice. "Of course, Papa," Abigail finally said. "We were wrong. You're certainly invited to the wedding." "And what about our business?" Harrison asked cautiously. "These problems with suppliers and rent. Everything will be back to normal," I assured him. "I'm not going to penalize you financially. It was just a demonstration." Ralph Baxter, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "I can confirm that I have already prepared all the necessary documents to restore the previous terms of cooperation. They will take effect immediately." "Thank you," Harrison exhaled with obvious relief. But that doesn't mean everything will go back to the way it was, I warned. Trust takes years to build, but it's destroyed in an instant. We're going to have to relearn how to be a family. We're ready, Daddy, Abigail said, and I saw tears in her eyes. Yep, I'm so sorry. Me too, I replied, feeling something inside me soften. Not full forgiveness, but a step towards it. But let's look forward, not backward. Hubert Woodcroft stood up. I think we all learned a valuable lesson today about the importance of family, respect, and open communication. And I'm glad that our families are coming together in such an interesting context. Everyone laughed lightly, and the tension in the room began to ease. And now, Hubert continued, I suggest we all have lunch together. I have a reservation at the Côte d'Azur. There we can continue our conversation in a more relaxed atmosphere. While everyone was getting ready, Loriane came up to me. Are you all right? She asked quietly. It was quite emotional. Yes, I nodded. Thank you for your support. Without you, I probably would have just kept pushing them financially, which would have only made things worse in the long run. Sometimes you need a fresh set of eyes, she smiled, and a little female intuition. Trenton joined us, still looking a little shaken. Grandpa, I don't know what to say. I feel terrible for paying so little attention to you all these years. You just trusted your parents, I said, patting him on the shoulder. That's natural. But now we have a chance to get to know each other again. I'd really like that, he said sincerely. Abigail and Harrison stood a little apart, still digesting what had happened. I could see them talking quietly among themselves, occasionally glancing in my direction. It would take time for them to fully comprehend the situation and their role in it. As we were leaving the conference room, Robert Montgomery, who had been watching from the corner of the room, came up to me. Well, old fox, are you happy with the result? Not quite what I had originally planned, I admitted, but maybe it's better. Family is a complicated thing, he said philosophically, but in the end, it's all we have left. I nodded, looking at my daughter, son-in-law, and grandson, now surrounded by the Woodcroft family. Perhaps Robert is right. Perhaps, despite all the hurts and disappointments, family is something worth fighting for. Not the perfect picture from an advertisement, but living people with their own flaws and weaknesses that sometimes hurt, but are still a part of you. I didn't know what the future would bring, if Abigail and Harrison and I would ever truly bridge that chasm of misunderstanding and neglect. But today was the first step. Today they saw me for who I really was, not who they thought I was. And that was a start. Fergus, are you coming? Victoria Woodcroft called out, standing at the exit with the others. Yes, I answered, heading towards them. I'm coming. And in that moment, I realized that I no longer felt invisible. No longer did I feel like a shadow of the past, remembered only out of necessity. I was now part of the present, and perhaps of the future too.